Hello friends, we are going to study the politics of the governed, and this is by Partha Chatterjee, which is in your paper Post-Independent Indian Literature, and this is Partha Chatterjee, Politics of the Governance, page number 53 to 78 in the Politics of Governed, Reflection on Popular Politics in Most of the World, Columbia University Press, New York, 2004. This is an essay we are going to study, and before because right now my concern is to just go to the straightforward the text which is prescribed for you and study that. So the page number is 53. So I will just go to page number 53 and then only we will start. So let me just come to the page number 53. This is page number starting with one page number is mentioned here 4, right? So let's come to page number 53. I think it's somewhere 18, then come to 30. We are going for the 53, 48, and yes, this is from here. So let me just read out and then we will understand what is that. The politics of the governed. Let me take you on quick tour through political society, or at least those part of it that I am familiar with, because there are many parts about which I know very little. Our first step is along the railway tracks that runs through the southern part of the city of Calcutta, not far from where I live and work. A major arterial road flies over the tracks. If you stand on the bridge and look in front of you, you will see high-rise apartments blocks, a ritzy shopping mall, and office of the major oil company. But if you look down, you will see a narrow line of shanties with irregular tin and or tile roof lined with dirty plastic sheets running all along and perilously close to the railway tracks. These belongs to squatters who have been living here for more than 50 years. In the early 1990s, some of my colleagues at the Center of Studies in Social Science, Calcutta, under the direction of Ashok Sen, carries out a study of one section of these shanties. This section has the official name of Govindpur Railway Colony Gate Number 1 and it contains a population of about 1500 people. The settlement apparently emerged in late 1940s when a small group of peasants from the southern Bengal who had lost their lands in the aftermath of the Great Famine of 1943 came to the city in search of a livelihood. Soon there were thousands of others streaming into the city every day. These new migrants were from eastern Bengal, now East Pakistan. They were refugees produced by the partition of India. Over the next decades, the suburb of Calcutta would accommodate a refuse immigration of the more than 3 times an original population of the city. Most of them settled in public and sometimes private property illegally, but with the tacit acquiescence of the authorities, because where else would they go. The refugee settlement acquired the official and popular name of colonies. The stories told by some of the early settlers of our railway colony make it seem almost like a frontier settlements. 4 or 5 men took the lead in organizing the place. They invited in new settlers, divided up plots, helped build the huts and shacks. They also charged rent for the new settlers. Adhir Mandal and Haren Mandal. Adhir Mandal and Haren Mana were two of the key men in the colony until the mid-1970s. They had made links with the Communist Party, the growing opposition political force with the strong support among the refugee population in the city. They dealt with the railway authorities, the police and other government agencies on behalf of the colony. Adhir Mandal owned about 200 shacks which he rented out and was known at this time as Zamindar of the rail colony. The landlord, such was his dominance. Communist Party leaders now say that Adhir and a few others were the local vested interests, although they were with the party. They behaved like bullies, one party leader said, and were involved in the party graft and extortion. Adhir was very clever. Uh, Haren Mana often stole a part of the fund he raised for the party. We overlooked these things since it was difficult to find a replacement for him. He could, how could we expect to find in the rail colony an honest person with the Haren's drive and initiatives? For time to time, the railway authorities would make attempts to remove the squatters and claim the land. In 1965, the railway engineers tried to build a wall to encircle the settlement. The residents set up a human wall, which women in front, preventing the trucks carrying and building materials from coming near the colony. During the emergency in 1975, there was a serious threat of eviction. Some nearby settlers were razed to ground by bulldozers. Our rail colony residents mobilized a member of the state assembly from the post-Soviet Communist Party, then allied with Indira Gandhi's ruling Congress Party, to intercede with the chief minister and dissuade the railway authorities from carrying out the demolition. The threat passed. What we have said so far will not be unfamiliar to those who have read or heard about political mobilization within the electoral system inaugurated in post-colonial India. There are hundreds of similar stories that have come from cities and villages of India. They were generally summarized under a theory of patron-client relationship, of vote bank, of faction leaders. One distinct feature of our case might have been the involvement of the cadre base, deeply ideological Communist Party, but even that we saw from the interview with the party leader was not, at least in this case, very much more that mutual arrangement of convenience. The party made no claim that Adhir Mandal or Haren Mana were communist revolutionaries, mobilizing the people for political action. This was not political society as I have described it. The new trend, however, emerged from early 1980s. Adhir Mandal and so-called Zamindar was now dead. In 1983, the railway attempted to put a fence around the settlement. The residents organized once more to resist the move. They had a new leader now, somewhat unlike character Anadi Bera. He was called the Master because he ran a primary school across the street from the rail colony. Although lacking a high school education, Bera taught the poor children of the area to read and write. His real popularity, however, was a theatre enthusiast. He organized and acted in amateur jatra performance. Amateur jatra performance. Though the open air theatre in the round form so popular in Bengal, it was through his theatrical activities that he came in touch with the resident of rail colony. He had his own problems with accommodation and soon he rented a sek in the colony and moved in. Anadi Bera was the chief organizer of the resistance by the squatters in 1983. In 1986, he set up a new association of the residents of the colony, Jan Kalyan Samiti, the People's Welfare Association. The People's Welfare Association. With the objective of starting a medical center and library. The local municipal officials, political party leader, officers of the local police stations and prominent middle-class residents of the neighboring apartment blocks were regularly approached to raise funds for the associations and to be involved with the activities. The government has started a major health and literacy program of children in urban slum called the Integrated Child Development Scheme (ICDS) at Anadi Bera's initiative. ICDS opened a child care unit with the rail colony. The unit was located in the association's office room. The ICDS immunized children against polio, tuberculosis, tetanus, and other diseases, provide them with the daily snacks, and has to train staff to run a play school and provide counseling to parents on birth control option. ICDS staff also maintain a detailed record of the livelihood, income, consumption, and health of every family in the colony. ICDS scheme is one example for how the residents of our scattered colony could organize to get themselves identified as distinct population among group that could receive the benefit of a governmental program. But this that is not the only instance. Having set up associations, the residents now use this collective form to deal with the other governmental agencies such as railway, the police, municipal authorities with NGO offering warfare or developmental uh, services with the political parties and leaders. For instance, if one inquired about how the colony got electricity, since electricity fans and television sets are not uncommon appliances in their sex, and residents are usually evasive. At last, this how it was at the time of the Professor Ashok Sen's field. One suspected that the electricity wire were illegally tapped. But there are many stories from Indian cities where electricity companies face the persistent theft of electricity and the legal difficulty of recognizing legal squatters as legitimate individual consumers have negotiated collective rental arrangement with entire squatter settlement represented precisely through associations of the kind we have described. There is thus the entire set of para paralegal arrangements that can grow in order to deliver civic services and welfare benefits to groups whose every habitations and livelihood lies on the other side of legality. I I later found out that sometimes in the late 1980s the colony actually did obtain a legal electricity connection through the six community meters organized by the welfare association. Not only since 1996 the residents even have individual electrical connections. The municipal authorities also supplies them with water and public toilet facilities. All of this, of course, on illegal occupied public land barely a yard or two away from the railway lines. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Although the crucial move here was for our squatters to seek the fine recognition as a population group, which were standpoint of governmentality is only a useful empirical category that defines the targets of policy. They themselves have had to find ways investigating that collective identity with the moral content. This is an equally crucial part of the politics of the governments to give to them empirical form of population group and moral attributes of community. In the case of our rail colony, there was no given communal form readily available to them. Some of the residents came from southern Bengal, others from the former East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. Most of them belong to the different middle and low castes, although there is a sprinkling of upper caste too. A survey carried out in mid 1990s found that 56% of residents belong to scheduled castes, a legal recognized category of former untouchables caste, and that are entitled to affirmative benefits from the government. And 4% of scheduled tribes, the rest are Hindu caste. The community such as it existed here was built from scratches. When the leading member of the associations speak about the colony and its struggle, they do not talk of the shared interest of the members of association. Rather, they describe the community in the more compelling terms of shared kinship. The most common metaphor they use is that of the family. We are all a single family, said Ashudas, an active member of the association. We do not distinguish between refugees in East Bengal and those from the village in West Bengal. We have no other place to build our homes. We have collectively occupied this land for so many years, and this is the basis of our claim to our own home. Badal Das, another resident, explains why they have to stick together as a family. We live in the face of the tiger, he said, using a saying that is common in southern Bengal. where tigers and humans live alone as adversaries, to refer figuratively to the ever present threat of eviction. But it is not any prior biological or even cultural affinity that defines this family. Rather, it is the collective occupation of a piece of land, territory clearly defined in time and space, and the other threat. It's remarkable how clearly the resident defined the limit of their so called family. They are defined by the territorial limits of the colony. Ashu Das explained the other side of the man of that neighborhood. We don't cross the limit. Those limits are often crucial in determining claims. We can become member of the association who must contribute to collective festivity or who can demand jobs as security guard in middle class apartment blocks in neighborhood. Within so-called family, now there is much internal variety. Few men have specialized skills or stable jobs. Most go out looking for temporary jobs as laborers in the construction business. The women usually work as domestic help in neighboring middle class houses and are often the principal earner in their household. In the early 90s, this study was carried out. The earnings of colony residents varied from 1,000, that is $30, to below to 100 rupees, $3 per month per capita. A different survey carried out a few years later found that more than half the families had total earnings of less than 2,000 per month. The average income of the settlement being less than rupees 500 per capita per month. Some were owners of the sex rented out to other residents, all outside the pale of the law, of course, because no one had any legal titles. But there appeared to be a little conflict here between landlords and tenants. Most disputed between neighbors and even between material apartments were settled by the welfare association. Not everyone was happy with this intrusiveness. One woman who had moved into the colony after her marriage said that she found her neighbors too noisy and a backbiting, given to backbiting. But community life was also sustained by sports activities, collective viewing of television show and videos, and by regular festivals. The biggest festival organized by association is annual worship of goddess Sitala. She had curious history, originating in rural South Bengal as a folk goddess, dispensing or preventing the spread of smallpox. In recent years, now that smallpox has been eradicated, she has emerged in the slums of Calcutta as a goddess who generally look after the health of her children. She is now worshipped in week-long festival financed by the small donations for slum residents in defiant imitations and middle-class festival of much better known as infinitely more glamorous Brahminical goddess Durga. So, more glamorous Brahminical goddess Durga. During Sitala festival, the association organizes musical show and jatra performance. Their masters Anadi Bera are naturally taking the leading role. A lesser festival is the worship of the goddess Kali, where the younger men of the colony are given a free rein with video show, meat eating, and drinking. The People Welfare Association, created by the residents of Rail Colony Gate Number 1, is not an association of the civil society. It springs from collective coalitions of property law and civic regulations. The state cannot recognize it as having the same legitimacy as other civic associations pursuing more legitimate objectives. The squatters, on their part, admit that their occupation of the public land is both legal and contrary to a good civic life, but they make a claim to a habitation and livelihood as a matter of right and use their association as the principal collective instrument to pursue that claim. In one of its petitions to the railway authorities, the association wrote, among us are refugees from erstwhile East Pakistan and landless people from South Bengal. Having lost everything, means of livelihood, land, and even home stead, we had to come to Calcutta to eke out a living and in search of shelter. We are mostly day laborers, and household help living below the poverty line. We have somehow built a shelter of our own. If our homes are broken, we are evicted from the shanties. We have nowhere to go. Refugees, landless people, day laborers, homestayed below the poverty line are of the demographic categories of governmentality that is governed on which they define their claim. In the same petition, the association also states that also, along with the other cities of Calcutta, it is in the favor of the improvement and extension of the city rail services. If for this purpose it was absolutely necessary to shift us from our present dwelling, association demanded a suitable alternative home state. Thus, alongside its reference to the government obligations to look after poor and underprivileged population groups, the association was also appealing to the moral rhetoric of a community striving to build a decent social life under extremely harsh conditions and at the same time affirming the duties of the good citizenship. The categories of governmentality were being invested with the imaginative possibility of community, including its capacity to invest relations of kinship to produce a new, even if somewhat hesitant rhetoric or political claim. These claims are irreducible political. They could only be made on a political terrain where rules may be bent or stretched, and not on the terrain of established law and administrative procedure. The success of these claims depend entirely on the ability of particular population group to mobilize support of to influence the implementation of governmental policy in their favor. But this success is necessarily temporary and contextual. The strategy's balance of political force could change. The rule may no longer be bent as before. As I have pointed out, governmentality always operate on the heterogeneous social field. On multiple population group with the multiple strategies, here there is no equal and a uniform exercise of the rights of citizenship. And thus, it is quite possible for the equilibrium of strategic politics to shift enough for these quarters to be evicted tomorrow. In fact, in early 2002, after these lectures were delivered, citizens group successfully moved a public interest litigation in the Calcutta High Court, demanding the eviction of the settlers in rail colony because they were polluting the waters of the Ravindra Ravindra Sarovar Lake in South Calcutta. A substantial section of the squatters had, in meantime, shifted their allegiance from the left front to the Trinamool Congress, left front to the Trinamool Congress. In early March, they managed to physically beat back a police force sent in the government to implement the court order. They are now hoping against hope that their party leader would soon be reinstated as railway minister in the union government in Delhi. They might then get rehabilitation before they are forcefully evicted. Such is the tenacious logic of strategic politics in political society. To illustrate how a shift in the strategy balance of political force can dramatically affect the lives of thousands of people surviving on the margins of urban life, let us walk up the avenues about half a mile to the north of railway tracks. This is Gharia Heart, the heart of middle class South Calcutta. They are now building a new flyover at the busy crossing here. A few years or so ago, these were wide avenues with broad sidewalk and brightly lit a shop front. Middle class residents were happy as their city was being restored to its original beauty and charm. Before the street and sidewalk has been taken over the thousands of street vendors, for most For almost 30 years since the mid 1960s, the major roads of the city were clogged with the rows of shabby kiosks occupying most of the sidewalks and frequently spilling on the roadway itself. The payment stalls were clearly performing an important economic function and providing the low level but vital source of livelihood to thousands of people. The vendors had operated strategically in the political society, successful mobilization support among citizens and political parties to establish and maintain their tenure, and clearly illegal occupation of the street. In the mid 1990s, however, the tide tunnel, there was increasingly pressure on the communist-led government of West Bengal to clean up Calcutta in order to attack foreign investment in growth sector and petrochemicals and electronics. The government support among the urban middle class was failing sharply. In 1996, Subhash Chakravarti, the minister who has successfully organized the disposal of Balak Brahmachari dead body, was given charge of clearing the Calcutta street over a period of 2 weeks in well-planned, coordinated action condemned Operation Sunshine. Municipal authorities and the public demolished all street sides stalls in Calcutta, cleared the a sidewalk, expanded the road, and planted trees. The vendors were still organized, sensing that they were being abandoned by the left. They now turned to the opposition parties. They did not resist physically. There were no violent confrontations, but the political balance having turned against them, they had to yield their place on the streets and wait until the promise of rehabilitation materialized. Not every population group is labeled able to operate successfully in political society, and we have just seen even when its success are often temporary. To give you an example of the organized group that clearly failed to make any headway in political society, let us move further north to the older part of the city, the College Street, where the old campus of the university is still located and which is the seat of Bengali publishing industry. There is an entire neighborhood here of labyrinthine lanes and LA where the principal activity is the printing, production, and selling of the books. One can find an amazing mix of business organization and technologies here, for large corporate house with modern photo typesetting equipment to tiny owner operators letters press where texts are still typeset by hand and where one could come upon a hand operated uh, treadle machines in the perfect working order bearing the inscription made in Manchester. Now, 1882. In 1990s, the letterpress was virtually wiped off the face of Calcutta. The effect of the global spread of electronic printing in every conceivable language in front. But another part of the publishing industry, bookbinding, continued to use technology and in more than 120 years has not changed in the slightest. We walk into any of the boundaries here and except the claim electric lamp and perhaps a transistor radio, blaring film music, we could be in 19th century a bookbinding workshop. An entire municipal ward is here called the Ripara and bookbinding quarters, where there are 500 bind- binderies employing 4,000 workers. My colleagues at the Center of the Studies in Social Science Survey and Bookbindings in 1990s. There are many different kinds of bookbinding units and workers coexisting for the most part of the bare margins of viability, frequently in competing with one another. The few large units have 20 or more workers each in floor space of 3,000 square feet or more. Their permanent workers are on monthly salaries that in 1990s could go up to $618, enjoy the benefits of the paid leave and pension. The vast majority of units are, however, of the medium or small size, where the owners are also workers and are often no more than 2 or 3 employees. Nearly a third of the workers are employees only during the peak business seasons. The average wage of skilled maid workers in 1990 was around 500, that is $15 a month, and that of the relatively unskilled women workers around 400, that is $12. If they work a full 8 hours a day, there are children too, employees as boys, regardless of the gender, they are still boys, and helping hands who could be engaged in all sorts of jobs for fetching tea to loading and unloading piles of the books. They could earn about 150 rupees, that is $4.50 a month if they are paid in cash at all. Because frequently all they get is food, clothes, and place to sleep, these earnings are extremely low by the standard of industrial employment in India. But this is unorganized industry lodged deep inside what is called the informal sector. There were uh, there were concerted attempts in 1970s and 80s to unionize the bookbinding workers and bargaining with the owners of for the better pay. Activists of the Communist Party, Marxists, took a lead in this, especially after their party formed an state government in 1977. In 1990s, there was a three-day strike in the binderies of the Daftari Para. The form of strike and its resulted are instructive. The workers demanded a wage increase of rupees 100 a month, but 90% of the binaries were unites whose owners were themselves workers. Everyone knew that most owners would never be able to pay the increased wages. The strikes then became one in which the entire industry at Daftari Para, owners and workers together, tried to put pressure on builders to pay, publishers to pay more for binding jobs. The biggest publisher threatened to get their jobs done from other units in the city and even from the outside the state. In the end, when the large binderies in Daftari Para agreed to increase wages by rupees 75 a month, strikers declared a great victory and called off the agitation. Following the strike, union activists in Daftari Para were once more at a low ebb. Unlike what we saw in the rail colony, there is very little sense in the Daftari Para of the collective identity of bookbinders. Here are 4,000 people in the same trade in small urban neighborhood. Most of the men sleep in their workshop at night and go home at their village on the weekend and holidays. The women came from the suburb, usually from refugees to quarter colonies like the one we saw earlier. They travel by train but cannot afford to buy tickets, choosing instead to flee when the conductors make an appearance. The workers in Daftari Para generally vote for the left parties, but they know about politics from their rural connections, not because their lives are workers lead them to politics. Instead, they speak of ties of the loyalty between owner and worker, of mutual acts of kindness and paternal care. A retired worker, the vulnerable Habib Mia, speaks of the inqilab or revolution that had overtaken the country after British left, so that now not even the wealthy and the properite, propertite can take care of the poor. But there is no engagement here with the apparatus of governmentality. The bookbinders of Dattaripara have not made their way into political society. Their examples show once more the difficulties of the class organization in the so-called informal sector of the labor, where the capitalist and the petty mode of production are intertwined in a mutual reinforcing tangle. Despite the sincere efforts of the many activities, Leninist strategies of the working class organization have founded, the political leaders of the left have instead turned their attention elsewhere and found much greater success in the political society. The real story of political The real story of political society must come from the rural West Bengal, that is where the left parties have converted the functions of the governmentality into the potent and amazingly stable source of local support from a clear majority of the population group. Much has been written on how this was done, from the land reform to the institution of democratic local government in the village to the maintenance of the tightly disciplined party organization too, and some critics allege selective and carefully calibrated violence. But for my discussion here, I will focus on the problem I raised in an early chapter. How can a particular claim of the marginal population groups, often grounded in violations of law, be made consistent with the pursuit of the equal citizen and civic virtue to produce a viable and persuasive politics of the government? There has to be considerable act of mediation. Who can mediate? You will remember the key figure in the successful mobilization of our rail colony into the area of political society. Here is the master theatre enthusiast Anadi Bera. The fact that he was popularly known by his role as the theatre teacher of a primary school is not insignificant. The school teacher was probably the most ubiquitous figure in the recent expansion of political society in rural West Bengal. In 1997, Dwai Payan Bhattacharya, one of my colleagues in Calcutta, studied the political role of school teachers in two districts of West Bengal. The recent expansion of the Purulia district, he found most primarily school teachers were members of the Communist Teacher Association and many held elected positions in different levels of local government. They also held top posts in the party and the peasant organizations and had been elected to the state legislature and parliament. Many of them were earlier associated with Gandhian organizations of social work. From the early 1980s, then the communists pushed their hand, land reform and agriculture development program. They wooed the school teachers who soon at the forefront of the political activists in the district with the traditional landlord class removed from the political scene. The teachers became crucial to the new politics of the consensus that the left was trying to build in rural Bengal. In the 1980s, a popular perception of emerged everywhere that school teachers had the will and ability to find commonly acceptable solutions to local disputes. Since they were salaried, they did not depend on agriculture income and thus did not have strong vested interest in land. Most came from peasant background and were thus thought to be sympathetic to the poor. They were educated among the society of vast literacy. They were familiar with the language of the peasants and as well as of the party, well versed in legal and administrative procedures, and yet organically part of the village community. As party as party leaders in local government, they were crucial in the implementation of the governmental policies in the countryside. They interceded with the bureaucracy using language of administration but claiming to speak on behalf of the poor. Simultaneously, they explained government policies and administrative decisions to the people of the village. Their views were frequently taken by the government authorities to represent the local consensus. They recommended specific local form of implementation of the government program, authenticated list of the local beneficiaries, and could be trusted to carry local opinion with them. In 1980s, school teachers wielded unrivaled power and prestige in the rural districts. It was common to hear village saying that their school teacher was the one who most commanded their trust. Now, before the admirers of the Robert uh, Putnam claimed support in this evidence of the theory of social capital, let me emphasize one more the distinction I am drawing between civic community in the sense of liberal civic society and political society as I have described it. The rural poor who were mobilized to claim the benefits of various governmental programs do not do so as member of civic society. To effectively direct those benefits towards them, they must succeed in applying the right pressure at the right place of the governmental machinery. This would frequently mean the bending of the stretch of the rural because existing procedures have historically worked to exclude or marginalized them. They must therefore succeed in mobilizing population group to produce a local political consensus that can effectively work against the distribution of the power in society as a whole. This possibility is opened up by the working of the political society when school teachers gain the trust of rural community to plead the case of the poor and secure the confidence of the administrators to find a local consensus that will stick. They do not embody the trust generated among equal members of the civic community. On the contrary, they mediated between domains that are differentiated by deep and historically entrenched in equalities of the power. They mediate between those who govern and those who are governed.